And we should be live. Hello.
Hello, welcome to the House of Fun.
Happy Tuesday.
Yes, happy Tuesday.
You're such a short ass. I'm
I
going
know, can't help
to
it.
move the computer. Or...
Well, I've shrunk an inch and a half in the last few years. It happens when you get old.
It happens.
Mind you, I've shrunk that way, but not this way.
Yeah, no, for every inch she shrinks that way, she makes up for it that way.
Yeah.
Elder abuse, you heard it here first.
What's new? Nothing's new.
Nothing's new, exactly.
Anyway, today we have a repeat visit.
Yes, from the
a
wonderful,
very famous lady author that we had some time ago.
And her audio book narrator, voice actor, is going to join us as well. I see he's just popped into the green room, so
good.
All is good.
Yeah.
And we will be discussing her literally encyclopedic knowledge of this bloke. This is one of, I think this is actually classified as a weapon in 14 states. It's so heavy. But without further ado, let's welcome to TeaFlix Jude Southerland Kessler and Scott R. McKinley.
Hi, you two.
Hello. You know, it could be a workout tool.
There you go.
Yeah.
You know, like biceps, delts, you know, the whole bit. Thank you guys so much for having us on.
Oh, pleasure.
Absolutely. You might have a whole new line. You'd have to talk to Yoko, but you might have a whole new line of John Lennon shake weights there.
I like that. That's a really good idea.
So these books are just incredible. This is She Loves You, obviously. And then there are six, going to be a total of 6 or 12. Nine. See, I knew it was
you
a
get it in
multiple
a
of 3.
minute.
And there's another one of my favorites. And this is with holiday time and travel time and people like Mark going on cruises. This is a fabulous companion to take with you because it will see you through the whole. I mean, look at this. Look at the encyclopedic knowledge and work this lady and her team does. Incredible.
That's 1 year, believe it or not, 1 year.
I can imagine. I'm surprised it's not longer than that, actually, Jude.
It is really, I mean, this one is from May of 1963 until the end of February 64. So not even quite a year.
Wow.
Oh, my goodness.
But I mean, you know, I used to, when my parents were alive, I used to read to them a chapter a day. And my mother would say at the end of every chapter, when are they going to get a holiday? When are they're working every day.
A bit like us, except for a bit more money.
And, you know, so when you're doing something important every single day, what day do you leave out?
That's right. Yeah, there's a lovely old book. It's dog-eared now by Bill Harry. It was a sort of day-to-day diary, almost. I think it's called the Beatles Encyclopedia. And it was, I think, only 3 or 4 years in their life. And it is like the New York phone book used to be. It's unbelievable how hard they those guys. It's just unreal. Oh, do you have it there? It's
it's falling apart. I've used it so much that it's falling apart. But
that's
I mean, you know,
what would I do? Your diary? Can you imagine?
I can't. I mean, it's just, you know, and he's done so many. That's one of like 20 books that he's done.
I know.
He's very prolific. We love Bill. He's done some writing for McCartney.com also. Absolutely. So last year you decided, skipping forward a little bit, you decided to do an audiobook of volume 3, which is where you met this talented, lovely gentleman with the dulcet tones here, right? In the John Lennon series, She Loves You. So is it because you just never ventured into audiobooks, or just because this is a lot of paper and it costs a lot to ship these things and it gives you a bigger reach internationally with audio? What made you think of it?
It originally, about 37 years ago, when I started doing the research for the John Lennon series, I knew that people had done thousands and thousands of books about the Beatles. There were biographies, there were photograph coffee table books, there was fan fiction. Imagine if the Beatles all became president simultaneously or went to the moon, or, you know, there was a lot of that. Yeah. There were music explication books, but no one had ever, what I wanted to do was make you feel like you were there, that you were a fly on the wall as these things were unfolding. So it's written like a narrative, but it has 4,000 footnotes in it. So that you're getting what they said, even what they ate, what they wore, what they did. But you read it as if you're reading a story. But still, I never even with all of that, I never felt like you were really, really there. And then one day I got on Messenger a note from Scott R. McKinley that said, I've just done the audiobook for Jay Bergen's magnificent work, Lennon the Mobster and the Lawyer.
Yep.
And would you take a listen? And I thought, audiobook, I have never done this. It's really not my bag. And I started listening to it. And I can't even express how flabbergasted I was. I am a very, very, very glass half empty person. My father taught me to drive by looking at the highway and thinking, what am I going to do when that guy swerves into my lane? What am I going to do when that deer runs into the road? I always have a plan B for the worst case scenario. I'm a very worst case scenario person. And I hear this guy and I'm like, oh my gosh, this is John Lennon. This is John W. Lennon. He is so good. And I call him and I said, look, can you do Paul as well as you could do John? And he goes, yeah, well, I think so. And I said, George? And he goes, I think George may be my best. And I said, Ringo? Yeah. Look, can you do Brian? Because Brian, Neil, Mal, Ed Sullivan, Sid Bernstein, they're all in this book.
Right.
And he goes, I think I can do that. I don't think he knew it was going to be as much as was.
What he was taking on. No.
Right.
He changed my world. And I never dreamed that he would be the key to take you there, to take, I'll take you there. That's his song. Right. Because he takes you back to 1963 and you are there.
So you're not just a fly on the wall reading the book, you're a fly on the wall listening to the conversation. My husband Martin produces audiobooks for clients. We have a studio here, we do a lot of it. And it really brings the story alive because people start to have, I think, in their mind's eye, a different imagination and a different, therefore, depth of involvement with the work, because now they're able to paint more pictures because they're not having to concentrate their brain on reading and holding something. Right. It's being fed to them, and then their mind can wander. It's amazing. I mean, there's so much reality to it that I had read these scenes. I wrote the scenes, and I knew them like the back of my hand. And he starts enacting these scenes, and I am literally falling off my chair laughing, or I'm crying. I mean, at Paul's 21st birthday party, when John is just out of control. I mean, he's upset in every way that a human being can be wounded and upset. And he really acts out. I'm in tears. Yeah.
Yes.
I mean,
anyways. Can we ask Scott, excuse me, Scott, tell us a little bit about yourself and, who you are, why you do what you do, and how it all began.
Well, I'm primarily a narrator and an audiobook narrator at that, and also a voice actor. So I've done this for about the last 3 or 4 years as a full-time kind of thing. I did this part-time previously when I worked for a corporation, and I did some of the training for them and released a couple of how-to trainings actually on YouTube for the company. And I enjoyed doing that very much. I did in-class presentations, and I liked doing voices during that because it would sort of wake people up a little bit, get them a little more involved in just listening to a fairly boring kind of training of just how to use a website. That was not exactly straightforward if you're programming it behind the scenes. And so anyway, that's more or less where I'm at right now. Before all that, I was a bookstore manager for quite a long time for one of the large national chains that's no longer with us, unfortunately. And I missed the book people and that kind of thing. I've always enjoyed reading out loud, and I always wanted to do voice acting and particularly audiobook narration. So anyway, long story short, I liked doing voices when I was younger. And I would do some impersonations, but as a kid, you don't really expect to sound like anybody who's an adult. And I loved doing the Beatles because the accent was just so nice to hear
Yeah.
and so
Right.
different from an American accent.
All right,
lads.
lads. All right,
lads.
lads.
If I don't,
All right, yeah.
All right.
yes,
draw
yeah.
trees to see you Tuesday,
Yeah.
and if I don't see you through the week,
I'll see you through the window.
Yeah.
Yeah.
exactly
I
right.
adored that. I tape recorded A Hard Day's Night as a kid
Yeah.
off of the television.
Really?
And back in the days before you had VHS tapes and all of that,
Yeah.
you would basically have an old-fashioned TV with a click, click, click channel changer. You'd
Yeah.
wrap a microphone cord around that and hang it down in front of the little speaker right underneath the
Oh,
channel changer. And then you just have to remember to pop the cassette every 30 or 45 minutes, depending on the length of the tape,
Wow.
and get the whole thing. And if you were lucky, later you would go back and, stop and delete the commercials out.
Yeah.
But I listened to that, I can't tell you how many times, so that I almost had the film semi-memorized.
Oh, wow.
And just as a way of reminding myself how it went, I would do the voices out loud.
Right.
And that's how I started to do just voices of the Beatles. Now,
And
when
then
Jude,
you decided to write to Jude.
Right.
well, when I got, the Jay Bergen book, I had to audition for it.
Yes.
And they were specifically looking for someone who could do a passable impression of John, because it was courtroom testimony. And the publisher wanted the voices around the courtroom to be noticeably different and recognizable, so that you wouldn't have to go, like defendant said,
Right.
prosecution says this, prosecution
Almost like an
says that.
audio play in a way,
Yes,
like
it
a
very
radio
much.
play used to be, right? But there were actually different people.
And yes, exactly.
Mm.
And I really wanted to do a John Lennon voice professionally, and I thought, well, this might be the last chance I ever get to do that. It's
Right.
always been on my bucket list of things I wanted to do, but I had no idea it would come up so soon after I'd started recording audiobooks. And I sent it in, and a few hours later, I hear back from the publisher like, "Don't go anywhere.
Right.
We just started auditioning. I just happened to see it like a few hours after the audition showed up in
Wow.
uh, and so I recorded it as quickly as I could and sent it in, because those auditions don't normally last long
No, they
when
don't.
it's a high-profile book,
Right.
Dada.
and I just wanted to get it in there.
My
And
husband,
so anyway, they hired
Martin,
me.
he does a lot of voiceover stuff in German, because that's his, it's his native language, and he's
Oh.
on a platform called voice123.com, and he
Yes.
has a couple of agents. But boy, they want that audition in and quick, and they limit it to 20 people. And if you're not in there in the first 15 minutes, you're the 21st person, and they don't even listen to it.
Wow.
You have to be like hand on the bubble, right? But you wouldn't call yourself an impersonator or an impressionist, right? More of a voice actor. What's the
More of a voice actor. I don't like to just like, oh, I'll bet I can. I'm not Dana Carvey or Rich
Right.
Little or any of the more famous people who do that for a living.
right?
Back in the day, John Biner, and
Right.
so I just try to give a sense of the voice as close as I can without going into parody.
With that
I
beach.
want you to listen to the book and you're like, oh, that sort of sounds like the person that I'm hearing. It's not a spot on match. I'm not trying to do that, but I wanted to give you a sense of it so you can follow along. Excuse me. And
You've got a cough. He's got the 100-day cough. I hope you don't.
well, that's why I've got tea to help with it.
This is McCartney's tea, of course.
Of course.
Naturally.
Well, I've got some more coming on the way, but
You have. It's on the way today.
It is. So
That
Elizabeth is asking, and I know everyone else is curious, are we going to hear any of those stylings and
yes, I'd be happy to.
today? I mean, is there a particular piece of the book that, or is there a
Well,
favorite
I
voice?
just happen to have a copy here. And,
Oh,
have
just
one. Well, don't let me stop you.
well, I thought I'd read a little bit where you get a little sense of all of the Beatles doing a press interview.
Great.
And this one happens to be with John Kelly, who was the Armed Forces. Harold Kelly, who was the Armed Forces reporter who interviewed the Beatles just before they came to America.
Okay.
right after they were in Paris. I think it's on January 24th, 1964.
Okay.
Does that
Yes.
sound right, Jude? And
Yes.
anyway, so a little bit of it. I won't try to skip around too much.
Okay.
But Kelly starts with this afternoon in our Paris studios, we're visiting with 4 young men. And if I just mentioned their first names, such as Paul and George and Ringo and John, I doubt if you'd know about whom we're speaking. But if I said we're here this afternoon with the Beatles, and if we were in England, I bet we get a big, great big rousing hurrah, wouldn't we, boys? Oh, yeah. Well, let's see. We have to my right here Paul McCartney. Paul, tell us, how did the Beatles get going? How did you start? Well, it's a funny story, really. It was back in the old days. We were all at school together, really. We grew up as school teenage buddies and things, and it developed from there, really. Well, did you sing together around school? Or yeah, George and I were at school together, and John was at the school next door, and Ringo was at Butland's. And we just started playing guitar and things. And it was on from there, really, as far as I'm concerned. Well, you say those were the olden days. Now, within the past year, you've mushroomed tremendously. Well, it's funny, really. I think it was the Palladium show, and the television show in England. And then following hot in the footsteps. Well, it's and the national newspapers got a hold of it, and they got a hold of Ringo, and Mike Brown found out about it. Yeah, Mike Brown found out about it. Yeah, a lot of columnists and things got into the idea, and they started calling it Beatlemania. Well, let's ask a question here, George Harrison. George, what's the status of rock and roll in England today? Is that what you call music? No, not really. We don't like to call it anything. But the critics and the people who write about it, they have to call it something. So they didn't want to say it was rock and roll because rock's supposed to have gone out about 5 years ago. And they decided it wasn't really rhythm and blues, so they decided to call it the Liverpool sound, which is stupid, really, because as far as we're concerned, it's just, the same as the rock from 5 years ago. Well, it's more like older rock. Down a little. Now, let's ask Ringo here. Now, you're the drummer. We caught your act at the Olympia the other evening. How long have you been beating those skins? Oh, about 5 years now. I've been with the boys about 18 months, with other groups before that, so that's 5 years. Well, since you boys have gained your current popularity, have there been many other organizations trying to imitate you, or perhaps take the thunder away? Let's ask John Lennon about this. Well, I suppose a couple people have jumped on the railway carriage. I mean the bandwagon, but it doesn't really matter, because it's flattery, and it promotes the whole idea of us. If we're away and then there's a few little Beatles still going around to remind people of us.
Wow.
Well,
Hey,
The crowd goes wild.
that's fabulous.
Yeah,
Thanks, Scott.
everybody's
Thank
just
you.
off the charts. There's a gentleman here. I don't know if he's related, but he's in from Ireland. Brendan McKinley.
Oh, wow.
He says, "Hi, Scott McKinley. I'm Brendan McKinley. Nice to listen to you live." So we might have
Thank you,
discovered
Brendan.
a long lost cousin on this St. Paddy's week, for which we're wearing green.
Yes.
Yes.
Very good.
And speaking of St. Paddy's and books, if you haven't got yours yet, we have a special one out by Madam here. It's called Mrs. McCartney's Liverpool Limericks and Other Random Irish Haikus. You can get it on her website, Miss McCartney's Teas, or Amazon if you want it signed. If you don't want it signed, you can get it on Amazon in time to read out loud with your corned beef and cabbage.
I got mine,
Yeah, thank you very much.
and I am looking forward to it.
Yeah, Mark Lindsay, our friend from Houston.
Hey,
he's
Mark.
saying that's great. Yep. It's like a family, isn't it?
It
It's great.
is.
We all
It's great,
know each
yeah.
other and
Mhm.
all of that stuff.
Yes.
So on to our next.
Yeah. Are you?
How long?
Oh, yeah,
How
I've
long?
got some notes here, and I've got the wrong glasses on, so bear with me. So, Jude, how long did it take Scott and Rand and you to create the audiobook?
Well, it was a lot longer than I thought it would
Yeah.
take. I know you don't really realize how much
No.
goes into it because first, Scott spent months and months by himself recording and re-recording. And sometimes if all 4 Beatles are in the room, and there are 20 reporters. He has to do all of the reporters' voices, as well as the Beatles, as well as, anyone that's with the Beatles, like Brian, who wants to interject something, Neil. It is a plethora of voices.
Yes.
And when he would complete a chapter, he would send it to Rand and to me, and we'd sit right here and listen and make notes, like on page 3, 3rd chapter, this word, a lot of Scouse expressions or French expressions. We'd say, let's change the pronunciation of that word. And we'd send it back to him, and he'd redo that and send it back to us. I would say it took us probably, wouldn't you say, about 10 months, Scott, all total?
I think so, from the very beginnings where I was still just reading the book for the first time.
Yeah.
Excuse me.
And he had the double whammy of the fact that he was recording it right there in his studio.
Right.
And it had to be when his house was completely silent. So he had to wait until his wife went to bed and was asleep. And then he would turn the heat off so the heater would make no noise. And he's doing this through the winter in New Jersey. It's freezing cold. And so a couple of times he actually got sick from doing the recording and had to take a few weeks off because he developed a sore throat and everything. It was brutal. Scott, we treated you terrible.
No, you were fine. I had COVID before I started recording part, and that's a terrible time to be getting over COVID is when you're trying to record.
Yes, absolutely.
Because
Knock on
that.
wood. We haven't had it yet. Knocking on everything wood.
Yes, please do. Please do.
So, but did you realize, Scott, when you just reached out that fateful message to Jude on Messenger, that you were going to wind up doing 182 voices?
No, I didn't. No, it was the furthest thing from me. I just wanted a feedback of like, does it sound good? Does it sound passable for John? Because I didn't really have any feedback outside of a couple of people who were just like, I used to work with much younger people than myself. I know that's hard to believe, but there were people like, I don't know what John Lennon sounds like. I'm sorry.
Of course.
He was one of the Beatles, right? Yeah, really. I would get that question.
Yeah.
Oh my God.
And
Well, how would you go about, because there's not, I know Brian Epstein's voice in my head because he was slightly posh. He was from Queen's Drive. He had a sort of a not terribly northern accent, but how do you go about finding a voice to listen to study of somebody so famous but so rare?
he was actually pretty easy because he'd been interviewed quite a lot.
Okay.
And all I had to do was listen to the interview. If I'm in a room full of people from England, I can guarantee you I'll start talking like that
Like a parrot.
rather quickly, depending on the ratio of Americans to English.
Yeah.
And if I have a boss with me who's staring at me, making sure that I don't do that, which was the case at my last job when we had offices in Australia,
Yep.
New Zealand, and England, all on the phone at the same time, and I was just salivating to get into it, as it were. But
Well,
you know,
I
didn't do
studied I studied when I was growing up at something called the Northwest Stage School, which is everything from tap dance, choreography, ballet, acting, scene setting, improv, set design, costume, the whole dang thing. And one of the things that we had to do was dialects and accents. So that was my favorite part of the whole school. And I can literally sit, it still amazes Martin to this day, I can sit in an airport lounge or any Oktoberfest, and I can probably nail to within 20 miles, if you're from England, where you're from.
Wow.
Because the accent in English, or the accent, not the accent, just the dialect and the names for things. Like in England, we have, bread rolls, just like you do here. But you have Kaiser buns here, but they have bap, they have batch, they have bun, they have roll, they have Kaiser. There's like 20 different words for a bread roll, depending upon if you're from Yorkshire or Scotland or wherever you're from.
Yeah. Yeah.
So,
I was looking for an audiobook to listen to the other day, and I was reading the reviews for this one book that looked very interesting because it was about a rock and roll band in the 60s. And I thought, oh, and it was an imaginary band, but it sounded like a great book. This is a review of that book. I won't say which book it was, but it said, this person is an extraordinary writer, and I was so excited that he published another book. But the narrator, there are lots of characters in this book with many different accents, a tall order. This person had to read 25 different voices. Sorry, I could not listen to this narrator. He did a terrible job. And after I read that, I thought Scott had to do 180, actually 83, because the narrator was the 183rd voice.
Yes, my own voice.
how did you approach, again, without becoming cheesy or a parody, how did you approach Cynthia Lennon? Because she had a very, very distinct, obviously you're not a female. Well, last time
I checked.
No, the gender change hasn't happened. But
how do you philosophically and artistically approach doing the opposite gender, and also, again, a very famous voice?
There I go again. I try to make my voice a bit softer, if I
Okay.
can, and just a little calmer and a little more gentler than a typical masculine voice if I'm doing, let's say, a generic voice. Now, if it's somebody in particular, I'll listen to them and see if I can pick up on any traits in the voice, such as an accent or
lisp or a real
yeah,
long-
and Cynthia has a slight lisp or have a slight lisp.
yeah.
And very gentle, very subtle, almost endearing, to be honest with you. And I found a clip online of her reading or just talking to Julian when he was just a baby, like in 1964 or maybe 65. It was such a gentle little piece. And I'm like, I think I can get closer to that.
Yeah.
And I knew Jude was really relying on it because she's a real major part of the story in a way that really hadn't been told before.
Yeah.
Outside of her own autobiographies. And it was one of the reasons that attracted me to the book in the first place, was that she's one of the unheard voices of the Beatles during the Beatles.
Right.
I mean, this is her
I wanted
book.
to
I
get to
mean,
that.
it's She Loves You, and it's dedicated to Cynthia. It's her book.
Yeah.
So she is featured quite prominently. I mean, after all, their honeymoon to Paris is in here. When they moved from Emperor's Gate, I mean from Hoylake to Emperor's Gate, she's heavily featured. Then Brian says she absolutely cannot go to America with them in February of 1964.
Right.
And John takes his only day off in Paris, flies back to London and says, book your flight, you're going with me to America. So she's there for the whole, end of the book when they're doing Carnegie Hall and Washington, D.C. and the whole bit. So she's integral to the story. And, that was one of the things I said, if you can do John Lennon with that deep John Lennon voice, how are you going to do Cynthia? And he did it.
Yeah. Brendan is asking from Ireland, how can we get this amazing audiobook? So Brendan and everybody, if you just read across the scrolling ticker at the bottom, you will see you can go to johnlennonseries.com. And I'm presuming you can also get it on Amazon and Audible and all of those places.
Yeah. And this is what it looks like for people that it's on every, let's see, I need to go this way. It's on every single did I go the right direction?
Yes.
Yeah. It's on every single audiobook platform. So there are like 24 audiobook platforms. It's on all of them. Whatever you
didn't go exclusive with Amazon and
that's
iTunes.
Wise. That's wise because different people subscribe to different things and what have you. But I would encourage you highly to go to johnlennonseries.com because you'll see all of the other wonderful stuff and links and so on. So Scott, are you considering doing another one of Jude's books maybe?
Yes. She would like me to do all of them. I'm not quite sure if my voice is up to doing the ones where they're very young. but I would certainly give it a shot. But I'm really looking forward to doing at least the next book, because Should Have Known Better takes place in 1964. It's my favorite Beatles year. I adore A Hard Day's Night. Even now, it still holds up. I think Tom Hanks said it was his favorite movie.
Mhm.
Hopefully,
great.
I'm not misquoting him, but I do know that he held it up special, if only because the sense of joy and happiness. Being Beatles had not yet worn off on
Yes.
them.
Right.
And it's
No.
evident from the film. Not even George, I think, hated it yet, but
Right.
Yeah.
it's and that's one of the reasons I liked the Beatles as a kid in the '60s, because
Mhm.
Yeah.
yes, I go that far back.
Mm. So, Jude,
And
sorry.
music was so happy.
Yeah, I know. Jude, what I was going to ask you is, besides telling people about the audio book, She Loves You, what are you working on right now?
Well, first of all, Elizabeth, thank you for your very sweet comment. And I think the world of you too. And Mark Lindsay, you too. And I'm so excited to meet a McKinley from Ireland,
Yeah.
because I am getting ready to go to Ireland for the first time in the summer. And Brendan will have to touch base, because I have lots of
Great.
questions. But right now, this is what I call the murder year, because I have 3 years between books. And the first 2 years, I sort of live my life and write daily. And then I get to the third year and realize, hey, you have 12 months, girl. You got to
Get
get
going.
with it.
Yeah.
So I am writing all the time, because in March of 2025, the next book, Shades of Life Part 2, which is going to be called Some Forever, is coming out, which starts the day the Beatles land in New York City on the 13th of August, 1965. 2 days later, they're in Shea Stadium. They do another Ed Sullivan show. Then they go on that big tour that incorporates meeting Elvis for the first time, the summit meeting. They almost get killed, literally almost get killed in Houston. Chicago, the Chicago concert, they're throwing folding chairs up on the stage. They have to stop both the afternoon and evening concert. It's so dangerous. It is an unbelievable tour. Then they come home and have 3 weeks to write 10 songs, because Rubber Soul has to be out for Christmas release.
Yeah. Oh,
Yeah.
I know.
I mean,
Crazy.
they go on a UK tour. It involves Revolver. And then we go into the summer of 66, which is nothing but trouble. It's the protest over the Budokan. It's Manila. John's comments taken out of context in Date Book, which blow up in America. And it ends when George Harrison says, right, I'm not a Beatle anymore.
Right.
So, I mean, it's a big book, and I'm about halfway through.
Yeah.
So everybody pray.
Turmoil, baby.
Yeah. I know.
Turmoil.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think when, you're a fan of somebody, and even so today, the pace of work when you're on top like that, it's absolutely unbelievable. You almost have to be like an Olympic athlete. Look at Taylor Swift. Yes, she's young,
Amazing.
but boy, is she working for it,
Yeah.
It's
Amazing.
jet lag, and it's hotel food, and it's sleeping on moving buses, and your plumbing gets out of order, and you don't know when you're supposed to go to sleep or go to the bathroom, or it's just unbelievable that the expectation that we put on our heroes, people we're supposed to love, we're just wearing their asses out.
I know, it's the truth. And really, you think about how much this meant to them, because we think of the things in this book that meant a lot to us, the Ed Sullivan Show and Washington, D.C., and going to Miami and all of that. But we don't think about the things that were important to them, because when they played Sunday night at the London Palladium, that was the zenith right there. I mean, they don't really even, Ed Sullivan is a foreign object, but Sunday night at the London Palladium,
absolutely.
That's home turf.
Yeah.
that's big. And Ringo's aunt used to say, play the Palladium and die.
Yes.
So, that's how big it was,
I know my dad, I know Jimmy Mack was like, well, he didn't know from Ed Sullivan. None of us did. We couldn't have a possible, because we didn't have the internet. We didn't have international television. You lived in little separate bubbles as far as everything, politics, media, money, everybody had a different currency. And so there is no possible way for Paul to explain the significance of Ed Sullivan to come home and have tea at Rembrandt and sit with us and his dad And he'd say, oh, it was amazing, but I want the weekend off. I don't really want to talk about it.
Right.
Because how do you regurgitate something so huge when you know that your audience doesn't understand it?
I know.
Now, if my dad can sit in his lounge chair and put the telly on and see the Palladium that he watches every Sunday night,
Yeah.
now there's a frame of reference. Now it's huge.
Yeah. And I mean, Ringo's so nervous when he goes on Sunday night that he vomits in a bucket backstage. He doesn't do that any other time, but
Wow.
he's terrifically nervous. And then 2 weeks later, there they are at the Royal Command performance.
Wow.
This was a big year. It was a big year. And the book that Scott wants to record, the next book, which he should have known better, the Beatles go to the Bahamas and somebody's celebrating a birthday there. I wonder who that could have been.
We had I think I told you the story for your research, but
You did.
George's, mine's the 15th and his is the 24th or 5th, depending upon which person you believe. And we had a German chef staying at he was the chef we were at the Balmoral Club in the Bahamas.
Yeah.
And Chappaquiddick had just happened, and Kennedy was there with his neck in a brace, and it was all very hush hush for them to be there. So can you imagine a little tiny resort having the Beatles and Kennedy there at the same time?
Wow.
And so right in the middle of that week, I got tonsillitis, so I couldn't celebrate my birthday. I just stayed in bed and drank 7-Up. And a few days later, I think it was probably around closer to George's birthday, probably the 22nd or 23rd of Feb, the German, somebody in the Beatles crew said, poor Ruth missed her 5th birthday and it's George's birthday in a couple of days. Why don't we have a joint birthday cake? So the German chef made a German chocolate cake. And of course, he didn't know the spelling of Beatles. He didn't know from Beatles. He didn't know what it was. He's a German stuck in an island in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean. And so he typed up, he iced on the cake, happy birthday, J-A-J-A-J-A, ya, in German. And he put 2 giant chocolate cockroach beetles on the cake.
That's hilarious.
And we didn't have a camera.
And nobody
Would
had a
you
camera.
believe it?
There was no picture of that cake.
No.
And if I'm not mistaken, George took a sword off the wall and cut it with the
That's
sword.
right.
That's right. That's right.
Yeah, that was one of my favorite episodes.
Then a few weeks later, that was right around that time, is when the avalanche that nobody talked about happened in Obertauern in Austria.
Yes.
Because they flew back from the Bahamas back to Europe over to Austria. And they thought, gosh, the security is amazing here. Look at all these people come out to greet us. But it didn't occur to them that they weren't facing the motorcade. They weren't facing the Beatles cars. They were facing the other way to look for signs of a second avalanche that nobody had told Brian or the Beatles about, that there was danger of another avalanche on the 15th of March, 1965. Because there had been a terrible one a couple of weeks earlier, and the city, the town, they hushed it up because they didn't want the Beatles not to come.
And all the girls were with them. Cynthia's there.
Yeah.
I mean, they took the girls with them. So this was going to be a lovely vacation / work.
We stayed at that hotel in 2015 when we went back for the anniversary. We did a whole week with our Viennese partners from McCartney Group, GmbH, Raymond Carl in Vienna, set up a whole tour, and we did shows with the Liverpool Cavern Club Beatles, and
John Keats,
and we flew in Frida Kelly, we did a screening of her movie, and then we flew in, or we drove down. Klaus Vormann came and did a book and a talk and a whole revolver evening. So we went back to Obertauern March 15th of 2015 and recreated the thing. So we got to actually stay at that same hotel and meet the guy, Harold Lutzinger, his name is. He was Paul's stunt double in the ski scenes.
Oh, that's fantastic.
Oh, and also the restaurant, they pulled out from underneath the cash register just the menu that all 4 of the boys had signed. It wasn't even
in a plastic
laminated
bag.
or in a plastic sheet or any, just
like, you
a
might
bit of paper.
You might want to put that in the safe, dude. The night of the dinner. So we recreated, because we do these dinner with the McCartneys, we recreated the menu that the Beatles had that night when they checked into the hotel, and we did a special dinner, and we printed replicas of these menus for souvenirs for everybody. It was really fun.
I'll tell you another story that you told me about the Bahamas that I love. I'll let you tell it, is when Leo McCartney would come into the restaurant at night.
No, you go ahead.
Well, he would stay in character. He would come in as Clang. And when he'd walk in as Clang, they'd all go, boo, boo.
Yeah, they used to hiss. And go,
like, like it was a pantomime, right?
yeah, that's right. Yeah.
Yeah.
And you know
Really
what?
fun.
One night we sat at the bar with Leo McCurn, and as you know, he had an artificial eye. He'd had an accident when he was young and lost an eye. And they started talking about it. He didn't mind ever talking about it. And he said, "Here, I'll show you." And I just said, "Good night and God bless everybody. I'm gone."
Going to my bungalow.
Yeah, with his pint of beer here and his hand over his eye, he was going to take it out and show everybody.
Oh
Well, you can
No.
always trust Leo, though. He'd keep an eye out for you.
Oh,
no.
You opened the door. I had to walk right through it. You know. Did I not?
absolutely. Yeah, I'll do the jokes.
Yeah. So, Scott, you had a question about one of Paul's albums, "Kisses on the Bottom." You were asking me the
Yes,
other day.
I did.
Never got to the bottom of it.
I wrote to Scott yesterday actually and told him.
Well, let Scott ask the question.
Yeah,
and then
go
we
on.
can-
Ask me.
Well, I really enjoyed the album Kisses on the Bottom. I'd been going through a really rough period when that came out, and I would listen to that in the morning just to calm me down.
Oh, yeah.
And the songs, I had thought that he had said that were songs that his dad had liked. And then I realized I might have misread that, and it might have been songs his dad might have liked
Yeah.
or might have played.
Mhm.
And I was curious if any of the tracks on that album were ones that Jim himself had played or
Yeah.
had enjoyed.
Yes.
And so, Angie, you had written
Yeah,
back.
yeah. He liked songs like "It Had to Be You" and "Carolina Moon." The McCartney family always used to have family reunions every New Year's Eve, and Jim would play the piano, and they'd sing songs like "Carolina Moon," "It Had to Be You."
I mean, what we would call
yeah.
nowadays the Great American Songbook.
That's right. Yes.
That with the
Yeah.
Porters and the Gershwins and all of that stuff was of the era.
That's
It
right,
was, you
yes.
know, it was happening.
Plus, they
then.
still sang the wartime songs like Vera Lynn's song, "There'll Be Bluebirds Over the White Cliffs of Dover," and
Indeed,
"We'll
yes.
Meet Again."
right.
Yeah.
Or if you go to a Japanese restaurant, you could actually sing "Whale Meat Again" if you want. If you want.
Oh, God, she's in thought today.
I'm doing my cousin Peter Archer proud this morning. He is the king of puns. It's just you cannot have a conversation with him.
Oh my gosh, that is so great.
He's telling
Everybody,
me you should write a book. He really should.
You've got to
It's just
laugh.
unbelievable.
Well, listen, I don't know if you are aware of it, but nobody gets out without a limerick.
and because it's St. Paddy's Day week and we have a limerick book, we've written a special
So
one
we've created
for you guys
one.
oh,
this morning. to
It'll be
sign
in
off.
the Smithsonian by tonight. I
Oh,
bet.
Oh, yeah.
Glasses
at
on
the
'em.
very least. So before
Okay.
we do this, thank you so much, Scott and Jude. And
thank you.
visit
Thank
johnlennonseries.com. And everybody, all our regulars are like, limerick time. Hear it? Come on, Paul Moody, here it comes. Pay attention. Get your fingers out your
Okay,
ears.
fine.
And a
One,
1, 2, 3. 'Twas a pleasure to hang out with Jude and learn of Scott's talents so shrewd. Because when he lends his voice to your volume of choice, it sure puts us all in the mood.
Yes,
Yay!
That'll be on my next album.
Exactly.
I
That
loved
sounds
it. Thank
great.
you guys so much. Loved it.
It was
Oh.
Great fun.
absolutely.
Thank you very much indeed.
My pleasure.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
We'll see you kids all of a sudden next Tuesday, 11:30 Pacific. Get the kettle on. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.